You can understand the Labor Party wanting to drag out the so-called sports rorts scandal for maximum political pain. So much so that today they managed to get the current inquiry extended to the 24th of June. Whenever a political party is focused on attacking the other side, its own internal issues tend to be sidelined. And there's more evidence by the day that inside Labor's ranks they're unhappy with Anthony Albanese's own goal of an uncosted net zero emissions target for 30 years' time. It doesn't hurt that the public are always inclined to believe the worst of politicians, so the sports rorts claims of pork barrelling will always get a head nod. But in the end, outside the Canberra bubble, where does this get us? By and large, for most ordinary voters, the Labor muck thrown around in relation to these allegations sticks to them as much as the coalition, because the public shrewdly suspect that both sides, they're as bad as each other when it comes to tweaking programs for their own benefit. Listening to yet another question time dominated by this issue today, let me tell you one thing. Most media types out there today running around with their Inspector Clouseau hats on have got sweet bugger all idea about how a ministerial office runs, how decisions move from the minister's desk back through the public service, and indeed how a minister's legal authority is exercised. And very relevant here, given it all happened so close to the start of last year's election campaign, how much they misunderstand the caretaker conventions. To start with, Labor's attempt to infer that 136 emails on this issue in the Prime Minister's office over a 6-month period is somehow a smoking gun is rubbish. It's not. In fact, it actually says to me that the PM's office was relatively detached from this program. Getting 136 emails over a 6-month period is hardly a deluge. It equates to less than 1 email a day, and believe me, I know what MPs and their staff are like. That's a negligible amount. When there's an issue running in an MP's electorate or some local cause they're lobbying for, they can fire off several emails a day to the Minister, copied to the Prime Minister, copied to the constituent, or to the Prime Minister, copied the other way around. And when a Prime Minister's office is fully engaged with the Minister trying to sort out something, dozens and dozens of emails can fly back and forth every hour, let alone every day. 136 emails over 6 months, get real. I used to get that many or more by 7 o'clock most weekdays. That's not the real issue. Today, Labor also tried to make a big deal out of the fact that Bridget McKenzie's signature on the brief authorising round 3 of these sports rorts arrived in the department on the day the election was called, which was, I'll remind you, April 11 last year. Again, big deal. The fact that McKenzie approved these grants, which was her job as Minister, not an official from the department or anyone from Sports Australia, the fact that she approved these grants on the 4th of April is what matters. A ministerial brief and all the letters that come with the brief that go back to the public service authorising money to be spent, they are legal instruments. And when they are signed and dated is what matters, not when the paper lands back on a public servant's desk. Imagine the risk to decision-making in this country if start dates or financial approvals were set when a public servant got the brief rather than when the minister signed it. I know on the Conservative side of politics, there'd be plenty of briefs that public servants didn't like that would then just never arrive, like stopping the boats, for instance. Now, on any given day, a Prime Minister would sign off anywhere from 100 to 300 plus briefs like this. If they were travelling, it might take a few days for the hard copy paper to be processed out of the Prime Minister's office. I mean, every single brief is annotated and logged and recorded in a database, and then it gets down to the department. And just on caretaker conventions too, by trying to infer the brief was received in the department on the day the election was called, somehow that's a crime, please, I repeat, it was signed on the 4th of April. Caretaker was not triggered until the 11th, the day when the election was called. Now, any idiot knows, or should know, decisions can be made before caretaker and then announced at any time a minister likes, including during an election campaign. This is all just inside the bubble process rubbish, dressed up to make the government look shifty. The real problem here is not that a minister is alleged to have pork-barreled marginal seats with the connivance of the Prime Minister. The money, after all, it went to both Coalition and Labor electorates, and not a single Labor MP is complaining about any of the grants they got. Now, the real problem here is that a relatively inexperienced minister in McKenzie was out of her depth, and she allowed a badly designed program to be put in place and then didn't stay on top of it, nor did her office. Now, she's not alone here. New ministers often find themselves accepting public service advice about how to design these things, only to regret it later as they learn more. That's why every office needs plenty of staff with grey hair, because experience matters. Indeed, to my mind, it's a mark of a good minister if they are not programmed by their officials, because let's face it, ministers should be running their departments and not the other way around. Deciding which sports club gets a grant and which one doesn't, given there's a finite pot of money to go around, that's inherently subjective. Should a club get taxpayer support because it's large and it's successful and we reward the winners? Or should a club get a grant because it's a minority sport and it finds it hard to raise money? Now, there's a real case for both those two examples, and who gets what in the end is a question of judgment. McKenzie's error here was to design a program where the money was allocated to Sports Australia and then expect she could get away with dismissing any recommendations they made. Now, of course, she should have been able to dismiss their recommendations. She's the boss, and recommendations are just that. Plus, she's elected by the people, and the officials are not. But as McKenzie found out, once bureaucrats are involved in this way, the minister's position not only becomes almost impossible, but almost redundant because of the inevitable criticism whenever the public service advice is not taken. Frankly, this is one of the big dangers for good government in this country. Always the cry goes up, doesn't it? Let the experts decide. But when it comes to value judgments, that's a job of the people we elect, because if we don't like the decisions they make, we can vote them out. The worst possible outcome from the sports rorts affair, in my view, will be a Canberra culture that gives even more responsibility to unelected officials and even less to the people we actually elect to run the country. After all, what's the point of having elections if the people we vote for just have to do what the unelected public servants tell them?